So it's been about 20 minutes since I've been trying to get what I feel like the football players and the softball players need to know. They need to know I've been trying to set up streaming to YouTube and it's just not working right now. So I have saved it to the cloud and we are going to finally talk about touch. So Emma and Mariah and Emily have just watched me sit here and just be like, bleh. I'm so ready to be done with Zoom. I really am. I'm just going to say it like it's been very helpful for things, but I'm done. I like, not enough like, I'll never use it again. No, I'll use it again, but I'm ready for the era of Zoom class to be over. All right. But for right now, we need it because we got to talk about touch. We're going to talk about touch. See? I'm petting my hand in a really creepy way. So let's go ahead and begin our discussion of touch. We will finish up the semester talking about this. Whatever I do not complete will not appear on the final. And remember that the final is optional. It posted this morning and it will be due next Wednesday at 11:55 p.m. It's multiple choice. There are no short answers, and I will also have your study guide up for you. So let's talk a little bit about touch. So here's what we're going to talk about over Wednesday and on Friday. So we're going to talk about what touch is. We're going to talk about the different mechanisms of touch. So we're going to talk about the different types of touch receptors that we have. We're also going to talk about how touch is processed in our central nervous system. We'll talk a little bit about tactile sensitivity and acuity. And then we'll finish up by talking about haptic perception, which is touch-based perception. So what is touch? All right, so touch is primarily, so as we've kind of talked about before, sensations are always going to be based on physical stimulus energy. And perception is how our mind interprets that sensation. So touch is ultimately a sensation that is caused by the displacement of your skin. So what I'd like you to do if you're in class right now, or if you're kind of zooming in, and if anybody is kind of watching you listen to this lecture and they watch you do this and they look at you weird, tell them it's Dr. Gilchrist's fault. Dr. Gilchrist told you to do this. So what I'd like you to do is take one of your hands and I want you to very gently rub your fingers across the top of your hand back and forth. And what you should notice is that you do see a little bit of skin displacement. Now, the skin on my hands is very thin, like my hands look very elderly in comparison to the rest of me. So I can see that skin kind of displace very easily. Now, on the other hand, what you can do, squeeze your hand very, very tightly for a second. Not too tightly. Don't break your hand, Emily.
I'm breaking my hand. She's strong.
Okay. Your hand is a she?
Yes.
Okay. And what, again, you are going to experience some displacement. So when we talk about touch, it is largely a mechanical sense. It is a frictional sense, and it contributes to a variety of other types of sensations. So the physical energy this time is actually displacement and stretch of the skin. So for example, when I'm gripping my cup, I am actually using a little bit of touch perception to help me. I need to be able to use the appropriate grip. If I don't use the appropriate grip on this bottle, I'm going to feel the skin in my hand and in my finger pads start to slip. So notice if I don't grip it tightly enough, it's going to slip a little bit. So I use my touch perception and certain amounts of skin stretch in my hands and the webbings between my fingers and on the pads of my fingertips to help figure out how tightly I need to grip or grasp something. So touch contributes to a few different types of sensations and perceptions. So the first is kinesthesia. So sometimes our kinesthetic sense is referred to as our sixth sense. And yeah, I know there are other people who say that ESP is your sixth sense, but I'm sorry, y'all. ESP don't real. I'm just going to say it. I don't think ESP is real. Mariah got to hear me rant about it last semester in general psych on the MP3s of our textbook. So kinesthesia is often referred to as a sixth sense. I would actually argue our vestibular sense is our sixth sense, but kinesthesia is basically the position or the perception of where your limbs are positioned and how they are moving in space. So when you're walking around people in a very crowded area, you have to utilize kinesthesia to make sure you don't bump into too many people. You've got to figure out how to position your arms, how to position your elbows when you walk, and so on. We have proprioception, which is a sensation of joint position. And this is going to be mediated both by your kinesthetic sense as well as these internal receptors in your muscles that recognize stretch. So for example, I'm going to try to see if I can do this. So you're not going to be able to see, but I'm going to try to do a squat. And I'm going to try to get as low as I can go before I kind of realize that I'm stretching too much and I need to come back up. Okay? All right. So there's a point when I get to the bottom of that squat that is basically like, I can't go any further. My muscles cannot stretch any further. And then I come back up out of the squat. We also have somatosensation. These are signals from your skin as well as proprioceptive receptors in your joints and your muscles. Sorry. I'll have a sip of my peach tea. I discovered peach tea when I was kind of in the 90s, when I was like maybe about middle school. Snapple iced peach tea. That's good stuff. Okay, so touch encompasses a variety of different sensations. So this will include things like pressure. So when somebody gives you a handshake, well, we don't really do that anymore, do we? I tend to prefer jazz hands. But I want you to go back and imagine when somebody would give you a handshake. And so I'm going to try to demonstrate. And of course, as I'm doing this with both of my hands, one of my hands obviously has to be upside down for this to work. How many of you have ever had a handshake with somebody and it kind of just felt very limp and kind of like a cold fish? So that's not a lot of pressure. On the other hand, I have met some people who will shake your hand and just squeeze it till you feel like your hand's about to fall off. So you are noticing changes in the pressure of that touch. Touch also helps us figure out if something is too hot or too cold. I myself like a hot bath almost every single night. It helps me relax and get ready for bed. And when I turn on the hot water tap, I have to be very, very careful because I will stick my foot in there and I will immediately yank it out because it's too hot. Vibration. So this kind of vibration that you might feel, or the vibration that happens as you're tapping keys on your keyboard. Itching, which I've experienced quite a bit after I got my second Moderna shot. Pain and pleasant touch. So some of you might have this where you might have kind of a spot that feels very, very nice to be touched. So for example, I kind of have this one little spot, and sometimes it's really hard to find. It's like right where my hairline meets my forehead, where if I just lightly scratch it a little bit, it's like, ooh, that feels nice. Or a hug from somebody. That can also be a type of pleasant touch. So sensations from touch provide us with a variety of advantages. So first of all, pain and our being able to sense pain is important. It helps us figure out what we should avoid, and it also helps us figure out if we are working ourselves too hard. It's a signal for rest and recovery. So sometimes I get that. I weight lift, and a couple of days later, I sometimes get delayed onset soreness. Now, some of that is due to the fact that, well, I spent the better part of an hour basically tearing up the microstructure of my muscles to help them grow a little bit stronger by working them. But when I get that muscle soreness, that's kind of my signal to take it easy for a couple of days and then try again. If you sprain something, if you pull something, generally that's a sign that you need to rest because you are risking severely injuring it. Additionally, it helps us figure out which objects we should avoid, ones that are too hot or too cold. Please don't put your hand in a bucket of liquid nitrogen. I know that you can freeze flowers and like smash them and stuff, and that's really cool, but you're going to damage your hand. And we know that exposure to objects that are too hot or too cold are really dangerous for us. And then finally, we use the sensation from touch and the displacement of our skin to help grasp for objects, hold them with the appropriate grip, and manipulate them. So touch is really critical for that. Otherwise, you'd be like me, dropping things all the time. So how does touch happen? So we're going to start by talking about the different sensory receptors for touch. And the first ones that we're going to talk about are what are called the mechanoreceptors. So remember that touch is primarily a mechanical sense. And for us to be able to manipulate objects or grab and grasp objects, we have to use mechanoreceptors to help us out. We have 4 different types. If you've had me for biopsych, and Emily has, and a few of you that are on your trip also have, you know that there are 4 different types of mechanoreceptors. Look, it's recording to the cloud. It's a little cloud. Okay, so touch begins with our touch receptors that are embedded in our skin. In particular, they are embedded in the outer layers of our skin, the epidermis and the dermis that is just below that. Now, within our skin, we have several different types of receptors. We have thermoreceptors that are responsible for detecting different temperatures of objects. We have nociceptors, which are critical for processing aspects related to pain. And we have the mechanoreceptors, which help us figure out things like pressure, vibration, and skin stretch to help us manipulate objects and reach for objects around us. So each mechanoreceptor. So we're going to start by talking about the mechanoreceptors because they're the ones we know the most about. Mechanoreceptors can be classified by 3 different things. We can classify a mechanoreceptor based on the type of stimulation that it responds to, the size of its receptive field, so either small or large. And so here's what this means. For a small receptive field, if it has a small receptive field, it's very sensitive. It's very sensitive. You can pinpoint where that touch is. If we're talking about something that has a larger receptive field, it is going to be less sensitive. It's about, so if a receptive field is the size of my palm and I touch somewhere within that palm, that large receptive field will register a touch, but it won't necessarily be very sensitive as to where that touch's location was on my palm. So small receptive fields mean sensitivity. Large receptive fields mean that they are less sensitive. And then we can also look at the rate of adaptation. So slow adaptation is often going to be looking for constancy. So something that is slow to adapt, we are probably looking at something that is very constant, like the stretch of my skin as I grip this water bottle. On the other hand, a fast rate of adaptation is going to be critical for changes in touch. So for example, as I pick up my cup, fast adapting mechanoreceptors note that change. As I put it down, they notice that change again. So fast adaptation looks for sameness, slow adaptation looks for constancy. Hey, y'all, don't forget to call your mom, if you have a good relationship with your mom. Call your moms or your maternal figures for Mother's Day. Yes, it is. Okay, so let's kind of talk about what the different mechanoreceptors look like. So here we have different layers of skin. So yeah, that's, wow, that chair got wedged in there. That was amazing. It was just like perfectly wedged. So what you're looking at here are different layers of skin and the different mechanoreceptors that are embedded in it. So one of the first things that I will talk about is that the endings that we see are what are known as encapsulated. So here's what that means. That means that, that these nerve endings are going to be attached. So these are basically your dendrites, and they're encapsulated within this little shell. So notice that the dendrites are basically embedded within these little capsules here. So for example, in this Pacinian corpuscle. So here we have our epidermis, which is the outer layer of our skin. We have the dermis, which is our middle layer, and then we're starting to get into what we call subcutis, or the subcutaneous area. So we're going to start by talking about these. These are what are called Meissner corpuscles. And because I am doing this on Zoom, and because we're recording to the cloud, Dr. Gilchrist gets to annotate. So here is our Meissner corpuscle right here. So Meissner corpuscles are largely going to be found in the epidermis. They are fast adapting, and they have small receptive fields. So we sometimes categorize them as FA1. So if it has a small receptive field, it is a 1. If it has a large receptive field, we categorize that as a 2. So this is a fast adapting cell that has a very small receptive field. So this is for noticing changes in skin slip and stretch. So it's going to detect changes as skin slips when you're grasping an object. So if something starts to slip out of your hands, your Meissner corpuscles are basically going to detect that change in skin slip and in stretch. So it's going to detect that there's slipping going on, and it'll help you correct your grasp. It'll give you feedback to maintain that grasp. Now, just below that, so I'm going to go ahead and clear this. So just below this, we have what are called Merkel discs. Now, depending on who you talk to, these are sometimes referred to as Merkel cell neurite complexes, but they kind of look like little discs, and you can actually see a bunch of those here. Notice that they are very, very small. And notice that the nerve endings are kind of attached to quite a few of them here. So these are slow adapting. As you can see, they have very small receptive fields. So these are designed to notice changes in texture. They're not going to be so fast adapting that they notice changes in texture, but they're designed to actually notice texture and engage in texture perception. So we have our FA1 and we have our SA1. And then we're going to talk about our large receptive fields, our Ruffini endings, and I love saying this, our Pacinian corpuscles. Emily, do you need more time? Okay. So our Ruffini endings are right here. So whereas our Merkel discs and our Meissner corpuscles are largely embedded in the epidermis, the Ruffini endings are largely going to be in the dermis. And also, here's a sweat gland. So our Ruffini endings are slow adapting, and they have large receptive fields. So we're going to the fact that they're large means that we're going to characterize it as a type 2. So it's SA2. So Ruffini endings are largely looking for constancy. Ruffini endings respond best to sustained pressure and constant skin stretch. And then finally, in the subcutaneous region, we have our Pacinian corpuscles. These are fast adapting and they have large receptive fields, as you can see in this image, and they are designed to respond to changes in vibration, particularly if that is of a high frequency. So like tapping and things like that.
Where would like blood be?
Blood?
Yeah, like if I poked my skin and blood came out, is this all before that?
Let's take a look. That's actually a really good question. So for those who couldn't hear, Emily is asking where the blood would be in this. So let's take a look. So let's take a look what this might look like. Here's a pretty good picture. So here, it's kind of hard to see here. So here's our epidermis. We've kind of zoomed in on our epidermis and our dermis, but notice that you do have blood vessels and arteries that are embedded under the skin, and that's where the blood cells come from. So in this particular image, we're not actually seeing the blood cells that are kind of running through there and the arteries and the veins, but you know they're there. Look at your hand, flip them over. Look at the arteries and the veins that you have. So you know that those are definitely embedded within the layers of the dermis and the epidermis, which is why if you cut yourself, you are going to bleed, not because of anything related to the skin specifically, but because you penetrated the skin and also potentially nicked an artery or a vein or a blood vessel. So those are going to be embedded throughout here, but we're largely just focusing on the mechanoreceptors. Did that help? That picture was useful. I like useful pictures. So let's talk about the purpose of the 4 receptors using different types of actions. So remember that our Merkel discs are very small receptive fields, and they are slow adapting. They're there to notice texture. So you're often going to use Merkel discs for such tasks as reading Braille or using your fingers at the tip of a screwdriver to figure out if you need a Phillips head screwdriver or just a standard screwdriver. You can also do that with different types of screws. If you're using Ruffini endings, this is about holding out your fingers appropriately to grasp a cup. For your Meissner corpuscles are, so remember that here we're talking about sustained pressure. With Meissner corpuscles, they are fast adapting, so they are used to actually correct your grip if an object is slipping out of your hand. You'll feel that skin stretch. The Meissner corpuscles will register that change and you'll correct your grip. And the Pacinian corpuscles, you will detect those. So these are usually going to be a little deeper in the skin, but you use these to detect a mosquito landing on your arm and also figuring out how hard you're actually tapping your pencil or how hard you're pressing against the paper. I hope you have a wonderful Star Wars day. Had a wonderful Star Wars day yesterday. My partner found a GIF that was the re-release of Star Wars, now with 72% more Jar Jar. So it cuts to a scene from The Empire Strikes Back, and Darth Vader goes, "Luke, it's Misa." And then like Luke is clinging to the pipe and he looks a little confused, and then it's Jar Jar Binks and it says "surprise," and his face is just like, ah. It's actually really funny and it's very quick, but it says, "You wanted it, now it exists." For those of you that are here in class, I'll show it to you in a minute.
Also, if you have time this week to go to Precision, one of my friends is a barista there, and she made a Baby Yoda drink.
I saw that. I don't think I can get down with mixing matcha and mint. It's not my bag. If I want matcha, I want matcha, and I don't want you to mess with the formula. Like I'm very much a purist with that. Sorry, I love my matcha. Although I do make the very common mistake of having a matcha with almond milk, which you really shouldn't do. Like almond milk is too thin and doesn't really counteract the bitterness of the matcha. So yeah. All right, how about one more slide and we call it a day? So the mechanoreceptors are largely studied on hairless skin. Now, what about if we're talking about like hairy skin, like your forearm? Now, I know you can't tell, but I do actually have hair on my forearm, and odds are pretty good you do too. You're a human being. You've got hair on places. Whether or not you choose to remove that hair is up to you, but I used to actually shave my forearms. But what we find is that for hairy skin, for like our forearm and other areas, when we look at skin that is hairy, we typically look at this in cats. And I actually think that's kind of cool because I don't know if you're aware of this, but cats are super sensitive to touch. I don't even have to touch Earl's back. I can try to pluck out like a white hair that he has, and he will just go, "What are you doing?" They're very sensitive, and it turns out that they have additional touch receptors near the follicles of hair, and that can actually potentially play a role in pleasant touch, and it might explain why your cat loves to be pet. Unless you're my mother's cat. My mother's cat is weird. Up until my mother moved, my mother's cat liked to hide between the shower curtains in the bathroom. So she would just be on that little ledge between the shower curtain and the liner. Yeah, that cat is weird. All right, folks, we will talk some more about touch next time. For those of you that are out for football and softball, play hard, stay safe, don't ignore your proprioception, and I will see you next time. Bye.